Sarvebhyo Namaha. A very, very warm welcome to all of you. I am happy to share some of my thoughts on this very pertinent topic that has been taken up for discussion in this international workshop, that is Indian traditional knowledge, intellectual property, and people's rights. We all know that India has a rich history of knowledge systems covering more than 5 millennia. I would like to submit that to me, the history of Indian knowledge systems cover the vast spectrum of time, more than 10,000 years. These knowledge systems are known as Vidyas in our tradition, and Vidyas have been ever growing. They are multiplying in numbers, and they are developing in subject wise, theme wise, content wise as well. I've been delivering lectures on Shastra Paramparas, Indian knowledge systems, and I've been always saying, almost beginning all of my lectures, describing the 5 stages through which the history of development of these Vidyas continues to run in all its plurality. So these 5 stages cover the various evolutionary developments of our Vidyas. The first stage is genesis and germination of thought processes, which starts around 10,000 BC and continues up to 1000 BC. The second stage is of branching and categorizations of these knowledge systems, which starts around 1000 BC and runs up to the first century AD. And the third stage is of development through interactions, which runs in the first millennium AD. And the fourth stage is the expansion and cultivation of branches of knowledge, which runs from 1000 AD to 1800 AD. So these are the rough approximations of these 5 stages. The final fifth stage is of the modern period, which starts around 1800 and continues up to this date. So we see that Vidyas, the number of Vidyas is increasing, and there are always new additions from Anvikshiki to three Vidyas become four Vidyas. Then Vedangas are being developed. So four Vedas, six Vedangas, and Itihas, Purana, Nyaya, Mimamsa together, they make 14 Vidyas. And in this way, the number goes on multiplying till our times. Great thinkers, great philosophers have contributed to this continuous growth of knowledge systems. There are philosophers like Dirghatamas, Aitreya Mahidas, Uddalaka, Yagyavalkya, Shvetketu in Vedic period. And then there is a tradition of Kapil, Kanad, Gautam, Jaimini, and Vasyayana, Prashastpada, great Bhashyakaras, which runs up to our period. So, at the backdrop of this, I will make certain stray remarks about protecting intellectual property rights with respect to these great traditions of knowledge systems. One submission which I would like to make here is that sustained effort should be made to protect the treasure of manuscripts, which is constantly being stolen and being taken away. Lots of efforts have been made to bring back the archaeological artifacts, sculptures, which were smuggled or stolen from the temples in our country. Similar efforts should be made to retrieve the manuscripts which were smuggled or illegally taken away from our country to other countries. A manuscript may be of much more importance of greater importance than an archaeological piece, any sculpture, or an artifact, because the manuscript might be comprising some valuable information about a knowledge system. From my personal experience, I know that the manuscripts are being still smuggled illegally, and they are being taken away from old repositories. They may be private collections of kings, palace libraries, or private collections of pandits or their inheritors. So they are being sold or they are being smuggled. So during the past 75 years, many valuable manuscripts have disappeared from kings' palace libraries or even great institutions of traditional Sanskrit learning. This is a serious problem, and such cases should be treated as very serious national scams. And there should be a strong law to stop further cases, and a commission should be set up to inquire how many manuscripts recently have been taken away illegally, and efforts should be made to retrieve them. So we should make a resolution to urge upon the government to pass a strong law for this illegal trade fairing of the manuscripts, which form a very important, valuable part of our knowledge systems. The other and more positive line of action to protect this intellectual property, which lies stored in manuscripts libraries or even books libraries, is to accelerate the process of digitization of manuscripts and rare books, and to place the digitized copies on internet to make them available to the scholars for academic use. Good efforts are, of course, being made in this direction. There is a need to accelerate these efforts. You will all perhaps agree that protection of intellectual rights or even protection of human rights is a burning problem of our age. This problem did not appear in such proportions before our ancients. The consciousness for human rights and intellectual property rights is also a relatively modern phenomenon. We have a tendency to search whatever new things happen in our age, in our past, and we locate them in our past, any new idea which sprung up in our age, and they said that, and then we say that we also had this. We say that our ancients also knew about intellectual property rights and protection of individual rights, manavadhikara, for the well-being of a human being, for the welfare of society. To a certain extent, this may be true, but I really doubt whether there is any word in ancient Indian tradition to denote the exact sense of intellectual property right or human rights, the words as we are using now. The word adhikara, as used in Indian languages, in modern Indian languages nowadays, basically means a task or a duty assigned to somebody in Sanskrit language and in our tradition. These concepts have come for good. The concept of human rights, the concept of intellectual property right, they are necessary. And due to social advancement and development of democratic values and modern civilization, these concepts have developed. And also due to technological advancement. And they have come out after the process of industrialization, after capitalism, and the idea of an individual, the protecting the value of the individualism. And this was not perhaps there exactly as we have it now. This was not perhaps there in our tradition. In our times, there are profuse violations of human rights, And there are also violations of intellectual property rights. In ancient traditions, I don't think there is any hue and cry to protect intellectual property right and even to protect human rights the way these things happen in our times. There are king's courts, dharma sabhas are there, but I don't find instances of intellectual properties being stolen in these legal courts or dharma sabhas in ancient times. Why this happened? The case is other way around to me. There are profuse instances where the artists, the sculptures, the thinkers, the authors who have created some sculpture, some artifact, or who have authored some scientific work, a shastra, or who have written some epic poem or an excellent poem, some muktaka, they have sacrificed their individual identity many times. They don't claim their name. So they are contrary to our idea of intellectual property right. There are authors in ancient Indian tradition who are sacrificing their individual intellectual property right to protect a great tradition. So this is happening. For example, we have Mahabharata. Mahabharata goes on the name of Vyasa. Vyasa is said to be the author of Mahabharata. But who is Vyasa? Is he an individual? Vyasa is a tradition. If you say that it is Krishna Dvepayan Vyasa, the son of Parashar and Satyavati, then where is his Mahabharata now? Vyasa says that I authored a Jaya Kavya, Jayakhya Samhita of 18,800 verses. Where is that Jaya Samhita of 18,800 verses? Authored by Parashar Sutta Vyasa. It has been subsumed in the great Mahabharata, which forms a great tradition. So the individual Vyasa has disappeared, and Vyasa as a great tradition remains in the Mahabharata. Everything is by Vyasa, which is a tradition. Great authors have contributed to this tradition, the tradition of Mahabharata. The author of Nalopakhyana might have been a great poet. Nalopakhyanam in itself is a great epic poem, one of the most beautiful poems in the world library of literature. But the author has not given his name. The author doesn't claim his name. There may be several authors who are singing Nalopakhyana. They have contributed to the growth of this singing of Nalopakhyana, which is a tradition. It becomes a greater tradition. It forms the part of a greater tradition, which is Mahabharata. So the authors sacrifice their identity to join this great tradition. Nalopakhyana, Savitrupakhyanā, Yayatyupakhyanā, several upakhyanas, which were independent works by great poets. Those great poets have sacrificed their individual identity, their individualism, to be a part of this tradition because they believed that tradition is more valuable. Individual identity is not that valuable. Now we may object. Why not protect an individual identity? This question, of course, is there. And sometimes there may be pathetic instances that the names of the Shilpis who carved beautiful sculptures, they are not known to us. And sometimes those names are is carved out in small letters, but those great Shilpis are not remembered in the tradition. So tradition sweeps away the individualism, we can say. But this has been the great tradition. You may decry it or you may appreciate it, but the tradition is there that individual is not that much important. Tradition is important. You can sacrifice if you are willing to sacrifice your individual identity, as several great authors did. If you want to protect your individual identity, then of course There is a defense structure. There are strategies to protect your intellectual copyright, your intellectual, even though there is no word for intellectual copyright in this tradition, but there is a defense structure to protect what we are now calling intellectual copyright, intellectual property right. So I will talk about these strategies which the ancients developed to protect the intellectual property, to protect an intellectual property. So there are some genres which lead to the protection of a text. Nobody can encroach upon that text, nobody can mix up anything in that text, and nobody can take away anything from that text. These are There are such genres like sutra, alpaksharam asandigdham saravad vishruto mukham astobham anavadyam cha sutram. This is the definition of standard definition of sutra. So you in a very precise language, using minimum words, you create a paribhasha, you give a concept, and then the structure of a sutra is such that nobody can forget, nobody can steal it, nobody can say that it is my sutra. So Nyaya Sutras will always go with the name of Gautama. Kanad Sutras will always go with the name of Kanada. Vaisheshik Sutras will always go with the name of Kanada. And Jaimini Sutras, Mimamsa Sutras will always go with the name of Jaimini. There can be no violation of intellectual property right of Kapil, Kanad, Gautam, and the great authors who have even there are other genres. There is a Vratti on sutras, on sutra texts. Then there is a Bhashya on Sutra and Vritti. Then there is Samiksha. There is Tika, Panjika, Karika. All these genres, they create a kind of a structure and a kind of a strategy to protect the sanctity of the text and to protect the name of the author, his individual identity as well as his intellectual right, which is which lies in his authorship of the text. So these are some strategies. Another great strategy which our ancients adopted to protect the intellectual property is the technique of memorization, kanthasthikaranam. And right from hoary past, when when mantras were being seen by the seers, we adopted this technique of memorization to protect an intellectual property so that it remains intact and it remains on the name of the seer who had seen the mantra for the first time. So Ashtavikritis we created. It's a kind of a wonderful defense structure against the loss of an intellectual property. And we could, through millennia, through several thousand years, we could protect the 10,450 mantras or even more than that, the whole corpus of Rig Veda, whole corpus of Atharvaveda and Yajurveda through the techniques of memorization and Ashtavikritis, Jatamala, Shikha, Lekha, Dvajo, Dando, Ratho, Gana, Ashtavikritaya Prokta. So, making Padpatha first, then Kramapatha. In Kramapatha, repeat every word twice. Then in Jatapatha, repeating thrice. And this repetition is increased. So, these are the techniques of memorization through which you will keep a text very, very intact without even forgetting the way of its recitation. These are the ways and devices which our ancients created, and they worked for protecting the intellectual property as well. Then another technique was recitation, the rich tradition of reciting a text. This also worked for the protection of an intellectual property. And there are discussions in several texts in Kavi Siksha Granthas also on the techniques of recitation, how to make a Kavya Patha, and the poet should train themselves in the techniques of Kavya Patha. If they are not well versed in the technique of reciting or recitation, then they are not even good poets. Raj Shekhara says that there may be good poets, great poets, but Saraswati is pleased with the poet who knows the art of recitation. Pathitum vetti saparam tasya siddha Saraswati. So, by the art of recitation, you can not only popularize your piece of poem, your text, you can protect your intellectual copyright because when you are reciting, everybody knows that it is you who have authored this. So Rajshekhara says in his Kavya Mimamsa, Ekasya tishtati kaver graha eva kavyam, anyasya gacchati surat bhavanani yavat, nesya vidagda vadaneshu padani shashvat, kasyapi sancharati vishwa kutuhaliva. There are poets who do not recite. They do not recite, then their poem remains with them in their house only. There are poets who recite their poems before their friends. So their poem remains in the memory of their friends. When those friends are not there, that poem is lost. But there are poets who recite their works in larger assemblies. Everybody listens to them. Even uneducated persons, illiterate persons who are culturally educated but not formally educated, they remember their stanzas, their lines, and their poems make a travel throughout the globe. Kasyapi sancharati vishwa kutuhaliva. In the whole universe, in the whole globe, their poems are traveling as if like curious travelers. So their poems survive. In this way, the intellectual property is protected and protected for its rights as well, because a good recitation makes it popular not only the poem but the author also. So the authorship will also remain. So the technique of recitation. There are poets like Bilhana who claims that my poems were being recited by villagers, by ladies in the villages of Kashmir. His Sanskrit poetry. So Bilhan was such a great poet who knew this art of recitation. So this is one strategy which we worked out against any violation of intellectual property. And there are inbuilt structures in the text which prevent the possibility of any violation of intellectual property right. For example, you take the concept of Kavya Paka, which has been given by Rajshekhara. Pad Nivesha Nishkampata Paka. The whole piece of poem or any scientific work is so structured that you cannot remove a single word from anywhere. You can't take away any sentence or any word from anywhere. So this is pada nivesha nishkampata. Every word is nishkampa. It cannot be jerked out. So, and the whole concept of kavyapaka, how many types of kavyapakas are there? These these ideas are discussed by Rajshekhara. And it is Rajshekhara who says that great practice is required to make a great reciter. Great poets may be there, but one should practice a lot. यथा जन्मांतराभ्यासात कंठे कस्यापि रक्तता तथैव पाठ सौंदर्यम नैक जन्म विनिर्मितम. Like the great musicians, vocalists who sing very well, they undergo through a lot of training not only in this life, maybe from in their earlier lives. Then they become great singers. In the same way, a great reciter becomes after a lot of rigorous training in recitation. So, this art of recitation makes your intellectual property not only popular, but it keeps it intact, protected against any violation of intellectual property rights. Then Rajshekhara in his Kavya Mimamsa discusses so many ways for a poet or an author to protect his piece of work from any violation of intellectual property right. In our modern language, we can say. So these are there are strategies is spelled out for a author, for an author or a poet. Rajshekhara says that he should himself write a manuscript in beautiful letters, and if he is rich enough to employ a copyist, which is called lekhaka in the tradition, a person who creates multiple copies of his poem, then he should employ one copyist or several copyists to make multiple copies of his work so that that work circulates in his name. And in this way, it is as good as printing a book that you create multiple copies of your book and they are circulated. So that book survives and it remains on your own name. This was a system which our ancients had developed, that a work produced in Dhar in central India almost immediately reached Kashmir, so that a Vamana who is referring to a contemporary play which is not from Kashmir, so that an Anandavardhana who is referring to a work of Amruka or of Bhattanarayana or of several other poets which do not belong to Kashmir. So how their manuscripts reached? And they are contemporaries of Anandavardhana, almost contemporaries. So we had created a system for circulation of manuscripts that they are reaching all the parts of the vast peninsula, that is Bharatvarsha, immediately, and the manuscripts are traveling. So this system was there. So this prevails, this prevents the violation of intellectual copyrights also. And Rajshekhara also discusses the calamities, the causes which leads which lead to the violation of intellectual property rights. Prabandhochcheda hetava. These are the causes where an intellectual property which lead to the disappearance of an intellectual property. Nikshepo, lending any manuscript, or vikraya, selling it out, donating any manuscript without keeping its copies. So all these are the causes which should be avoided to protect your work and its intellectual right. And then there is a whole discussion in Rajshekhara's Kavya Mimamsa running in almost 4 chapters on plagiarism. A modern author borrowing words, phrases, sentences, or stanzas, or even paragraphs from an earlier work. What is his right to take a word, a sentence, or a paragraph or a stanza from the earlier work? And this is at length discussed by Rajshekhara. He said that the poets, contemporary poets, modern poets are allowed to take phrases, words from earlier great authors. Otherwise, how the tradition will continue? The words do not belong to any particular author. If they have occurred in his poem, and you take a word, if you even borrow a sentence, but you contribute your own to it, you redesign it, refreshen it, you have an original concept for its new treatment, then that Shabdarth Harana, that plagiarism will not be plagiarism. It will not be called a theft because you have an original idea for its new treatment. You have made it a more relevant idea. You have contributed to it. So how to develop your own genius, your own original thinking, or your original perception or your imagination, so that you can borrow phrases, sentences, rich idioms from the earlier works, but nobody can condemn you for plagiarism. Nobody can say that you have stolen, because language doesn't belong to Kalidasa, Magh, or Bharavi, or to a particular poet. The words are there, sentences are there, but don't copy verbatim. So, the advice to the new authors, to younger authors, is that develop your own brain, your perception, your imagination, but do visit the tradition. Study the earlier authors. You will learn a lot from them. This is the whole. So, Shabdharan is of five types: Padatah, Padatah, Ardhatah, Vrattatah, Prabandhatah. You are borrowing one word, borrowing one quarter of a stanza, half of the stanza, full stanza. You are taking the whole Prabandha, but don't take anything verbatim. And copying one word from an author, like Deep Shikha. Kalidasa may be a Deep Shikha Kalidasa. But if I have used Deep Shikha as an upma in a different context, I cannot be called a thief. Deep Shikha is not a copyright of Kalidasa. So, ek padharanam na doshaya. Anyatra dvyarth padat. Rashtrikhara contributes to it. That you can borrow one phrase, one word, but don't borrow a dvyarthak pada. That slash in one word, that may be his copyright. He has contributed by creating a panoromsia, a pun on that word. That may be his idea. So don't take out the idea with the word. That idea may be earlier poet's idea. So uh, protection of the intellectual property which belongs to an earlier author and continuance of the tradition, its growth, both these things are maintained in this discussion, which is a very lengthy discussion otherwise in Rajshekhara's Kavya Mimamsa. He even says that even great authors have copied, and they may be having untoward intentions. I am aprasiddha prasiddhimanaham. The earlier poets is not known. Nobody will know that I have taken some lines from him. I am a well-known, reputed author. I am apratishtha pratishthavanaham. He is not so reputed. I am very reputed. So nobody will call me a thief. Aprakrantamidhamasya samidhanakam prakrantam mama. He has started writing this piece of literature, and I have also started. He couldn't complete. I can complete, so I take his idea. And his words and phrases are not so beautiful. I can make them more beautiful. So all these several ideas are there, which enables some clever, mischievous author to adopt a contemporary piece of work or even an earlier piece of work, and saves himself from being called a thief. But this is not a very praiseworthy thing. Rajshekhara is not appreciating it. It happens, Rajshekhara says, that even so called great authors do it. So, this violation of intellectual property, this plagiarism is there even in the great literary tradition as well. But one should avoid it. How to avoid it? This is the good discussion, a very pertinent discussion in Rajshekhara, in Kavya Mimamsa. And even in Anandvardhana, they are discussing Samvada. Samvada has two meanings in Anandvardhana and Rajshekhara. Samvada is a correspondence between two thinkers and two authors. They are entering into a dialogue. The contemporary authors, a new author is entering into a dialogue with the earlier author. And in that way, he is contributing to the continuance of the ideas of the earlier author. He is revisiting the piece of work which the earlier author has created. And Rajshekhara and Anandvardhana both, they discuss how this how these correspondences and dialogues happen between authors and authors, even between traditions and traditions, even between societies and societies. I can, of course, enlarge the whole concept. Not Rajshekhara and Anvardhana, they don't talk of dialogues between traditions, dialogues between nations. We do it now. So, but dialogues are happening between authors. Rajshekhara and Anandvardhana discuss, and they say that the new authors make an imitation of the earlier author. But this imitation should not be like Xerox copy. So they define the anukriti, reproduction of the earlier idea, earlier work in a new garb, how it happens, so that you appear original, you contribute to it in an original way. So alekhya prakhya, pratibimba kalpa, tulya dehi tulya, and pura pravesha sadarsha. These are the types of anukritis or samvadas which happen between two poets, between two works. There is an alekhya prakhya anukriti. Alekhya prakhya is copying verbatim. It is like Xerox copy. And Bimba Pratibimba is also you are producing a replica in another structure. Rajshekhara and Anandvardhan say that these are not the good ways to enter into a dialogue with the earlier works. They are decried, they are condemned. Alekhya Prakhya and Bimba Pratibimba, photocopying and imitating a poem, is condemned. Tulya Dehi Tulya is praiseworthy. It is appreciated. You visit a poem like entering into another body. Then you come out of it. Like Parkaya Pravesha, you go into the poem. You visit the whole poem, whole world of literature of Kalidasa. You visit. You must study earlier literature. You must visit them. You must visit the tradition. But you should come out of it. And then you redesign your own piece of work. So then you have traces of the earlier works. And those who are reading your new poem, they will be rereading the earlier poems also. But nobody will say that you have stolen them because you have created entirely a new structure. So T.S. Eliot says that when we read a contemporary author, we also read several other authors who have flourished earlier because their works are reflecting in his new work. When we read Tulsi Dasa, we remember several earlier works. We have echoes of Puranas, Nana Purana, Nigmagama, etc., in one single work. But we cannot say that Tulsidasa has copies because he has created entirely a new structure. Even lines are reproduced in Tulsidasa. Even words are reproduced from earlier works, earlier authors. Even several ideas are reproduced. But the whole piece is a unique structure and unique design, which is Tulsidasa's. Therefore, Tulsidasa is not an imitator, he is an original poet. And this is a taste of originality, that how many great works are echoed in your work, and nobody would say that you have copied. This is the great parameter of originality. So, Rajshekhara and Anandvardhana, they have discussed the idea of samvada. So, in this way, Shabdartharan or plagiarism, the great problem of plagiarism which we are now facing, that new researchers are copying an earlier PhD thesis. They should be trained how to avoid imitation, reproduction. They should they should be trained how to develop your own designs, your own perceptions. But nobody should say that don't read earlier works. Don't take ideas from earlier works. You should take words, phrases, ideas, concepts from the earlier works, but you should have your own framework. You should have your own work. So this is like Parakaya Pravesha, Parpura Pravesha, entering one city and coming out of it and establishing another city in a different layout, or Parkaya Pravesha also. visiting within another body, entering another body and coming out of it and making your own structure. So, in this way, our ancients have discussed plagiarism, the problem of plagiarism, protection of intellectual property rights in the modern sense of term also. But the tradition has inbuilt structures where such cases were very rare. Cases of stealing a poem, stealing an idea. So, memorization, techniques of recitation, and techniques of making samvada. These are great designs, devices created by our ancients, which are even relevant now. We have forgotten these techniques. We we think that memorization is a bad thing. It is ratant vidya we call, but we don't understand that through the techniques of memorization, how many great works have been saved, and the tradition could continue. Techniques of recitation also, they have dwindled into decay in our times. And the techniques of making samvada, they are very relevant even in modern context when we talk of intellectual property rights. Thank you very much. I come to the end of this talk.